talk about a little bit different topic today. We've listened to some just truly inspired citizens. We've listened to stories of optimism and enthusiasm. We've listened to stories of vision. And by the way, I want to say again how great it was to see Oburu up here. You know, when you think of a young man or a young woman going off into the military, we all, as he said, we all have visions and you make an impression. But it was awfully great to see a great young man wearing the uniform of our military service, standing up here talking about a vision of changing a continent and a generation. That's an impressive statement for the education that we provide to our young men and women. Jim Hayes talked about a great generation. He talked about really your generation and how you really are with your youthful enthusiasm, and I'm sort of beyond the youthful enthusiasm point, but you're changing the world in so many different ways. And I want to talk about part of that great generation. We've all probably read Tom Brokaw's book, and we're in awe of our parents and grandparents, my parents and most of your grandparents, who really took on the weight of oppression, of great difficult times during the Depression to grow up a nation that really inspired the world. And certainly we've been a nation at war truly since Iraq invaded Kuwait back in 1990, and that hasn't slowed down, and obviously we're involved in Iraq and Afghanistan today. But what's interesting is that in those times we've had something called the all-volunteer force. We've not drafted, as they did in my generation, young men and young women now to serve our nation. We've asked them to serve. We've asked them to step away from the security of their families. We've asked them to step away from the comfort of modern conveniences. We've asked them to go into strange places to protect the values that we have as a nation. And what's amazing to me is they've responded. You have responded. And I can't see all the faces and hands out there, but help me a little bit. How many of you know someone who is serving in uniform today? There's a bunch of hands out there. How many of you know someone who has been to Iraq or Afghanistan? And there's a bunch of hands out there. Our nation is producing a generation of young men and women who understand service to the nation. They understand why it's important for them to step away from their comfort level and to go out and make a difference. We've heard topics tonight in a broad variety of areas about how we can make a difference in our nation and in our world. But these young men and women are making a difference every day in places like Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Japan, in many other places around the world. Young men and women wearing our uniforms showing compassion that people, quite frankly, didn't expect. Young men and women who also understand that there is a price to pay for that commitment to service in our nation. Tonight I want to talk about that special group of young men and women who volunteer to serve our nation in our armed forces, and particularly those who suffer terrible wounds and walk a very long and difficult walk back into society and into a productive life. Make no mistake about it, we are the home of the free because of those brave young men and women who serve for us every day. Now, as you heard Alex say, I've been around the Air Force a long time. I'm a fighter pilot by trade, and I've had the honor truly to lead young men and women in combat. And while I will say that was easy because I was trained to do that and I was able to adapt, it became a very different experience for me when my son became a member of the United States Air Force as a flight engineer on our combat search and rescue helicopters whose mission is to go behind enemy lines and recover our wounded and bring them back to safety. I have another son who is currently in Botswana, so it was interesting to hear us talk about Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal, and then he's in Botswana now doing a pediatric rotation. While he was in the Peace Corps, he realized that the world needs doctors quite substantially, and so decided to go to med school. And so I have these two sons. One's probably more of Hicks' party, and one's probably more of George W.'s party. And the mom and I are caught in between. But when you begin to think about the gravity of sending your son off to war, or more importantly, you go to his mom and you say, this is going to happen, it adds a whole different context to the cost of freedom. On September 11th, 2001, I was the Director of Operations in Tampa, Florida at U.S. Central Command, and responsible for beginning the operations in Afghanistan and then Iraq. And so I was sending my own son into harm's way on those early days in 2001. I sure hope the plan was pretty good. Fast forward to March 2003, and we began operations in Iraq. And I sat in a video teleconference with the President, with all of our senior military commanders, and after the President gave his final direction to the military forces, he went off the air, and there were 11 3- and 4-star general officers on this video teleconference. 8 of us were sending at least one of our children into harm's way that night. So the reality of committing young men and women to combat is very personal to the leadership of your United States Armed Forces. And as a result, the loss of any of those or the wounding of any of those is a very personal experience. In February 2007, a young Air Force pararescueman named Scott Duffman was killed in an aircraft crash in Afghanistan. My son knew some of the pararescuemen that were good friends of Scott and asked me if I would be the senior Air Force member at the funeral in Arlington. And I said I would certainly do that. I happened to be working for Secretary Gates at the time, and he was called to the White House that morning of that funeral, and I wasn't able to attend. Fast forward to May of 2007, and I was on the mall in D.C. at a ceremony honoring children of young men and women, or children of men and women who had fallen in combat. And I turned around, and there was a young woman standing there with a 5-month-old daughter at the time, and her name was Mary Duffman. She said, "My husband was an Air Force pararescueman. It was the young man whose funeral that I was to attend." She's become part of our family since then. And those stories have proliferated across this nation as young men and women serve and fall, and more young men and women are injured and return. Our nation owes a debt of gratitude, certainly to each of those young men and women for their service, and especially to their families as they deal with the loss of a loved one or the long, very difficult rehabilitation of someone who's wounded. You've heard stories of great technology tonight, and I'm watching the time getting close, but if you think about the advancements in rehabilitative and reconstructive technology that we've seen today, today on the battlefield, if you are wounded and you are attended to by a medic on the field, within an hour they can have you back into the medical system. You have a 97% chance of survival. In Vietnam, that number was probably 55%. So today we see spectacular advances in medical technology and rehabilitative science, and you see really world-class athletes being brought back to life in the halls of Walter Reed and Bethesda, at the Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, places where young men and women compete with each other to return to a whole life. That's a difficult challenge, and it's made even more so by the fact that many come with injuries that are not so visible. The damage of traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress syndrome is maybe affects as many as 400,000 of our military men and women who have served. It's a challenge that requires a commitment from society to help. It requires a commitment from each one of us to help, to take time to get to know those families. They live in your communities. They're active duty, they're guardsmen, they're reservists. In many cases, that wounded warrior is not able to maintain the breadwinner status in the family. And so it's a husband or a wife taking on a very new role in a very difficult situation. And there are some spectacular programs around our country that help those young men and women every day. Some of them here in Colorado. Some of them need to be started maybe in towns close to your homes. We talked about cycling just a moment ago. There are two great programs called Ride to Recovery and the Wounded Warrior Project Soldier Ride. The Ride to Recovery, for example, just hosted a 6-day challenge ride with wounded warriors in a ride from San Antonio to Arlington, Texas. There's projects like Healing Waters, where a retired Navy captain who happened to be an avid fly fisherman went to visit Walter Reed and said, "Would y'all like to learn how to fly fish?" And took wounded warriors learning to use new limbs and out onto the front lawn to teach them how to use a fly rod. Today, that program has Healing Water fishing meets all over the country, and corporate sponsors raise over $150,000 a year to provide that kind of training and support. Here in Colorado, a program called CAMO, Challenge Aspen Military Opportunities, reaches out to wounded warriors and funds, having been funded with anonymous grants, and it offers a summer and a winter camp with therapy through seasonal sports for each of these. The Hartford Ski Spectacular, a Disabled Sports USA event, has similarly brought wounded warriors out onto the snow each year. Snowfest, as many of you may know, here in Colorado, Vail Resorts has been a great supporter. We bring our military families up to Keystone, and programs like Aspen Adventure put wounded warriors on snowboards and skis for the very first time. And you can watch these young men and women go from fear and apprehension to success and triumph. And if you don't think they're as competitive as any Olympic athlete, when they watch their buddy get on skis for the first time and they fall, they're going to get back up to be just as good as their buddy is. These are the kinds of programs that are helping not only with the physical rehabilitation, but the mental rehabilitation. There are some wonderful programs in art, and art has been proven to be one of the very calming methods to deal with post-traumatic stress. Aspen Point is a behavioral health group that began a Wounded Warrior program, art therapy program for soldiers at Fort Carson. And today in the Fine Arts Center in Colorado Springs, many of their pieces of art are on display. Colorado is a place of cowboys and cowgirls. In fact, we heard Hunter just a few minutes ago. Equine therapy is also proven to be a spectacular way to help calm the concerns of a young man or a young woman recovering from PTSD. At the Air Force Academy today, the Equestrian Center has created a warrior wellness equine program to assist those with these kinds of diagnoses. And being around the horses, being on the horses, has proven to be great therapy. As some of those warriors begin to transition into the civilian life and begin to move back into the workplace, that same program has a farrier program, and they've trained now 7 wounded warriors to become certified licensed farriers here in the state. So there are thousands of these kinds of opportunities out there. They're all looking for your support and a place to reside in your community. We need to help these young men and women who are trying to transition from a very difficult time into their life into becoming not wounded warriors. They want to become citizens in our communities. They need our help to do that. So when you have the time and you can give the effort, first stop and say hello. Second, ask how you can help. Look for programs like this in your community that will allow you to touch the lives of those young men and women who are preserving our opportunity to be in an event like we are tonight. Our nation owes our young men and women from many generations such a debt of gratitude. We see a free economy, as tough as it may be sometimes, with all the challenges that we have right now. We see the United States as a beacon in the world for freedom, for democracy, for market economy, for economic development. It's these young men and women that give us that chance. Let's give them a chance as well. Thank you very much.